Commander Jack Sable leaned back in the creaking swivel chair of his command room, which smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the kind of sweat that only comes from eternity in recycled air. The Argent Bastion, pride of the orbital relay network, was about 2 maintenance shifts away from becoming a floating scrap heap instead of the critical communication hub for the sector. The room thrummed with the low hum of machinery and the faint clatter of keyboards struck by fingers weary of typing, yet another report that no one would bother to read. The Bastion was the linchpin for interstellar messages, not that most of those messages weren't just bureaucratic garbage or requests for budget increases. "Hey Jax, you hear about the new sports feed?" Lieutenant Kress called from his console, eyes glued to the screen where a match was unfolding. "Kress, if it's anything like the last one, I'm gonna pass. Can't afford another ire watching grown men and women flounder like drunken flobworms on ice," Jax replied, rolling his eyes to the ceiling where a patch of mold was bravely colonizing. "No, seriously, it's a classic. Humans versus, well, humans, but they've got those ridiculous exosuits this time," Kress continued, his voice laced with the kind of excitement only found in the naively optimistic or mildly deranged. "Oh sure, nothing like a sport where the rules are made up and the points don't matter," Jax muttered, spinning in his chair to face the main view screen that dominated the room. At that moment the screen flickered with static before stabilizing on a broadcast. The athletes, clad in their ungainly suits, charged at each other with the grace of a malfunctioning mech droid, but at least they were enthusiastic in that terminally overcaffeinated way. "Look at that," Jack snorted. "We've got all the technological marvels of the galaxy at our fingertips, and we use them to make humans hit each other harder." Before Kress could retort, a shrill alarm cut through the room, silencing the banter like a gunshot at a tea party. "Incoming transmission," another officer shouted over the noise. Jax's attention snapped to the main screen, which was now displaying an incoming message request. The identifier was faintly ominous, a series of alien glyphs that translated loosely to, "We are watching you." "That doesn't sound ominous at all," Jax said, pushing himself upright with a groan. "Put it through. Let's see what flavor of chaos is brewing today." The screen blinked and there they were, the Opteran fleet, sleek metallic ships like darts in space, with a commander whose image now filled the screen. Commander Zoltar of the Opteran Navy, with a face that suggested he'd been born on a stormy day and never quite forgave anyone for it. "Humans," Zoltar began, his voice dripping with enough disdain to fuel a rocket. "Your recent transmission is an act of war." Jax blinked, momentarily lost for counter. "Come again, Zoltar. I think there's a misunderstanding here." "Misunderstanding?" "Your broadcast showed warriors in combat, threatening our peace-loving people. This aggression will not stand." Jax glanced at Kress, who was now hiding behind his console like a chastised schoolboy. "You mean the sports channel? Those are games, Zoltar, not war declarations." "Games?" Zoltar leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We don't play games with threats. Trust me, if we were declaring war, we'd send something more. Explosive," Jax said, sarcasm fully weaponized. Zoltar's image flickered as if debating whether to explode or laugh. "Humans and your absurd humor. Prepare to be boarded." The screen went black, leaving the room in stunned silence, a silence broken only by the distant sound of Kress banging his head against the console. "Well," Jax said, leaning back again, "this day just got interesting." The rest of the crew erupted into frantic activity, screens filled with data spewing from the system as they prepared for what was quickly escalating into a siege. "Kress, how about you stop making love to the console and get me a status report?" Jax barked, the edge in his voice tempered with the kind of weary patience only years in command can foster. Right. Scanners show they're moving into formation. Looks like they're ready for a good old-fashioned space party," Kress replied, flicking switches with nervous energy. Jax sighed. "All right, let's make sure they get the full hospitality treatment. Shields up, weapons hot. And for the love of all that's holy, someone get the broadcast team on the line." "You think they'll listen to reason?" Kress asked, doubt coloring his voice. "Reason? Kress, we're way past reason." "It's going to be charm and a lot of quick thinking," Jax replied, his eyes sweeping over the console displays, each flashing warnings of impending doom. The Argent Bastion shuddered as the Opteran ships took their positions, surrounding the station like a pack of wolves eyeing a particularly tasty, if slightly spoiled, meal. "They really know how to make a guy feel welcome," Jax said to the room at large, earning a few sardonic chuckles from the crew. "Commander," the comms officer called out, "the broadcast team is on the line." "Patch it through," Jax ordered, rubbing his temples in anticipation. The screen flickered again, displaying the frazzled face of the broadcast director, a man whose hair looked like it had been styled by a small explosion. "Commander Sable, how can I help you? We've got a situation. Your sports feed has been interpreted as an act of war by the Opterans." Any chance you can clear this up before they decide to redecorate us with plasma weaponry? The director's face paled, a tangible shade lighter that didn't inspire confidence. We'll send a clarification immediately. Make it snappy, Jax said. Zoltar's not known for his patience. Or humor. The transmission ended, leaving Jax to ponder the delightful absurdity of the universe where sports could almost start interstellar wars. Cress, what's the status on those shields? Holding for now. Let's hope they hold longer than my last relationship, Cress replied with a wry smirk. You and me both, buddy, Jax muttered, eyes locked on the view beyond their station walls where the Opterans waited, poised for conflict. Hours ticked by, every minute stretching longer than the last, as Jax and his crew waited for the universe's most chaotic misunderstanding to resolve itself. Finally, the comms crackled to life with Zoltar's voice, still as frosty as a moonlit tundra. Commander Sable, we have received your clarification. And, Jax replied, the weight of uncertainty pressing down like a black hole. And, Zoltar continued, his tone softening just a fraction. It appears there has indeed been a misunderstanding. Glad we could clear that up, Jax said, relief coloring his words. Though for future reference, maybe consider investing in a sports channel for your people. Might save us some headaches. Zoltar's image flickered back onto the screen, his expression taut as if trying to suppress an unwelcome chuckle. We shall consider it, Commander. But know this, next time you declare war, ensure it's with words and not, whatever that was. Message received loud and clear, Zoltar, Jax replied, matching the Opteran's dry amusement. The screen blinked off once more, leaving the command room in a silence full of the unspoken gratitude of a crew that had narrowly avoided becoming space dust. Well, that was fun, Jax said, turning back to his console as if nothing happened, though the sweat on his brow told another story. Yeah, nothing like a little interstellar crisis to spice up the day, Cress replied, stretching back until his spine cracked audibly. Jax chuckled, a sound laden with exhaustion and relief. All right, let's get everything back to normal, or whatever passes for normal around here. As the crew returned to their duties, the command room slowly filled with the regular sounds of the Argent Bastion's operations, a comforting chaos, as familiar as it was unpredictable. Jax sat back, his gaze drifting once more to the moldy ceiling tile. Guess we should be thankful, huh? Thankful, Cress asked, a hint of incredulity in his voice. Yeah, Jax replied with a tired grin, that Zoltar didn't see our cooking shows, and with that the room filled with laughter, a rare and precious commodity aboard the Argent Bastion, as they resumed their watch in the endless dance of the stars. As the Argent Bastion basked in the newfound peace and the fading adrenaline of narrowly avoiding interstellar catastrophe, Jax couldn't help but imagine how the universe loved to kick him when he was down. He wasn't wrong. The universe had a twisted sense of humor, like a cosmic prankster with a grudge. I swear if this day gets any more exciting, I'll need to start a sedative subscription, Jax muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as he glanced around the command room. Lieutenant Kira Voss, the communications officer and unofficial expert in turning the incomprehensible into something slightly more coherent, darted to her console, blue hair bobbing like a signal beacon in a storm. Commander, if you thought Zoltar was a bundle of joy, you're gonna love this, Jax sighed, as if drawing a breath too deep might somehow summon more trouble. Hit me with it, Voss. We've got another fleet incoming, she said, her voice dancing on that fine line between serious and sarcastically cheerful. And these aren't our friendly neighborhood Opterans. Surrock's fleet, by the looks of him. Great. Just great, Jax replied, his tone as flat as a pancake under a steamroller. Do they come bearing gifts, or are we skipping straight to the threats? Voss tapped a few keys with the dexterity of someone who had made bargain hunting a competitive sport. I'd bet on the latter. They're broadcasting something, but it sure as hell isn't a welcome party invitation. The command room tensed as Voss worked her usual magic to decode the incoming garble. Jax leaned over her shoulder, not that he understood half of what she was doing. She might as well have been summoning demons with a keyboard. Okay, here we go, she finally said, her voice tinged with that special mix of exasperation and grim amusement that space travel seemed to gift its passengers. The Surrocks aren't exactly Shakespeare. It's mostly a lot of surrender or die type stuff. Creative right, originality's clearly not their strong suit, Jax replied, rolling his eyes at the predictability of it all. Can you patch us through before they start sending greeting cards made of plasma? Voss nodded and worked some more console magic. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the Surrock's commander, a creature that looked like a cross between a predatory bird and a disgruntled accountant. Its beak clacked as if it had just discovered the concept of taxes. Humans, the Surrock's commander squawked with the kind of disdain usually reserved for conference calls. Cease your hostile communications immediately. Jax folded his arms and leaned back in his chair, wishing he had a stiff drink in hand. Hostile communications. Care to elaborate, or should I just guess wildly? Your broadcasts are an affront, a challenge to our sovereignty. The alien continued, feathers ruffling like a particularly irate feather duster. Voss smirked, mouthing good luck to Jax as she stepped back and let him take the stage. Right, the broadcasts, Jax said, thinking fast. I'm guessing you're talking about the sports channel. Not exactly weapons-grade material, I'll have you know. Your warriors clashing in combat. The Surrock's commander barked, his voice rising to an indignant crescendo. We demand immediate cessation. Clashing, yes. Warriors, not so much. Jax replied with a grin that was more grimace than anything else. They're athletes, it's a game. You know, for entertainment. The Surrock's commander's eyes narrowed, clearly not entertained by the explanation. Games do not involve violence. Jax chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. I think you and I have very different definitions of violence. Explain, human, the alien demanded, clearly not convinced by Jax's casual dismissal. Jax took a breath, scrambling for words that might bridge the vast cultural chasm between them. Look, it's like simulation, a way to settle disputes without actually blowing anything up. You should try it sometime. The Surrock's commander paused, his avian eyes calculating. Is this an attempt at deception? Nope, just the unfortunate truth, Jax replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. If we were really declaring war, I'd send you a memo with more exclamation points. Before the Surrock's could respond, Voss interrupted, her eyes wide with the kind of revelation that usually preceded a migraine. Commander, I think I know what's happening. The sports feeds, they're synced with our main communication frequencies. Jax blinked, trying to process this latest twist. So what? Our little games are getting lost in translation, more like they're being taken as military maneuvers, Voss replied, her fingers a blur over the console. Every tackle, every play, it's all coming through as tactical commands. Fantastic. We're broadcasting military exercises without even trying, Jax said, his voice a blend of disbelief and dark humor. This just keeps getting better. The Surrock's commander's image flickered impatiently. Is this incompetence or subterfuge, human? Little bit of column A, little bit of column B, Jax replied with a shrug, earning a few chuckles from the crew. We demand you cease your transmission, the alien insisted, seemingly unfazed by Jax's sardonic charm. We're working on it, Voss interjected, shooting Jax a look that said she was about as thrilled as she was caffeinated, and she hadn't had her coffee yet. Just a little interference issue. The alien commander seemed to ponder this, his beak clacking with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for miracle diets and political promises. Rectify this. Interference or face the consequences. Standing by, Jax replied with a salute that was more sarcastic than respectful. As the screen went dark, Jax turned to Voss. All right, how do we make this mess go away? Voss scanned her console, her brain working through the problem like a hamster on a caffeine high. I can try rerouting the feeds, but we're already sitting on a tech relic. It's going to be like performing surgery with a spoon. Do what you can, Jax said, resigned to the knowledge that nothing aboard the Argent Bastion was ever simple. And let's hope our friends out there have some patience. Not exactly the patient type, Crest chimed in, his tone dry as a desert afternoon. But maybe they'll stick around for the halftime show. Yeah, maybe we'll bore them to peace, Jax replied, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. Get on it, Voss. We don't want to test our luck any more than we have to. Voss nodded, diving into the task with the grim determination of someone who knew that even if things went right, they'd probably still go wrong. Hours passed in a haze of technical wizardry and sarcastic banter. Voss worked her magic, her fingers dancing over the controls like a virtuoso of chaos. Meanwhile, Jax did his best to stay calm, or at least pretend to. He'd learned long ago that leadership was mostly about looking like you knew what you were doing, even if you didn't have a clue. Finally, Voss straightened, a look of triumph mingling with exhaustion on her face. I think I've got it. The feeds are disentangled from the comms. Shouldn't be any more mixed signals. Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Good work, Voss. Now let's just hope they're in a forgiving mood. The view screen flickered back to life, the Surrock's commander's image reappearing like a bad news hologram. Human, we have detected a cessation in your hostile broadcasts. Jax nodded, trying to look as diplomatic as possible given the circumstances. Yeah, that was a bit of a technical hiccup on our part. No hostility intended. The Surrock's commander regarded him with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for used ship salesmen. Your incompetence nearly led to conflict. Almost, but not quite, Jax replied with a weary smile. And hey, no harm done, right? We shall see, the Surrock's commander replied, his tone carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats. Jax nodded, recognizing a diplomatic dismissal when he heard one. Glad we could clear this up. Let's agree to put this behind us and move forward. The alien's eyes narrowed, but there was a grudging acceptance in his posture. Very well, but know this, human, we will be watching. and we'll be here, probably broadcasting something equally confusing, Jax replied with a grin that was more defiant than friendly. The screen went dark, leaving the command room in silence once more. Jax leaned back, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Well, that could have gone worse, Cress said, breaking the silence with his usual brand of understated humor. Jax chuckled, the sound a mix of relief and lingering tension. Yeah, and it could have gone a hell of a lot better too. Voss joined them, her expression one of fatigue blended with a hint of triumph. I'd say we earned our pay today, though I doubt the universe will ever pay us enough for this kind of work. Ain't that the truth? Jax agreed, standing up to stretch his legs. Let's get things back to normal, or whatever passes for normal around here. As the crew resumed their duties, a semblance of routine returned to the command room. The usual din of controlled chaos filled the air, a comforting reminder that even in the face of interstellar insanity, life aboard the Argent Bastion continued. Jax took a moment to savor the quiet triumph before reality came crashing back. Next time, maybe we should broadcast cooking shows, fewer explosions. Voss snorted, a genuine smile breaking through her weary facade. Only if you promise to do the taste tests. Deal, Jax replied, grinning as he settled back into his chair, ready for whatever fresh madness awaited just beyond the stars. The Argent Bastion was still dripping with the ineffable charm of a ship that had seen better decades. The command room buzzed with the kind of nervous energy usually found at a family reunion where no one likes each other very much. Commander Jack Sable sat in his chair, watching the main view screen, which had mercifully gone back to broadcasting something that didn't involve his imminent death, at least for the time being. Then the alarms blared, because of course they did. Jax didn't even flinch as the red lights flickered on and off like a disco for people with death wishes. Sounds like someone's having a tantrum, Jax commented, his voice a mix of resignation and a touch of sardonic amusement. Voss looked up from her console, her blue hair catching the red glow like a siren. Commander, the Surrocs are targeting our defense systems. I guess they didn't appreciate our interpretation of peace. Can't please everyone, Jax sighed. What are we dealing with, Voss? Angry emails or full-blown plasma missiles? Missiles, she replied with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a root canal. Looks like they're keen on making our innards our out-tards. Well, Jack said, scratching his chin, at least they're decisive. Gotta respect that in an enemy. Lieutenant Kress, who had been diligently pretending to work, glanced up, his eyes as wide as someone who just realized they forgot to pay their bar tab. Any chance we could, not die today, Jack shrugged. I make no promises. But hey, let's try and keep expectations low. He turned to Voss. So, what options do we have? Short of sending an apology basket with a nice fruit selection. Working on it, Voss replied, fingers dancing over her console. But given the state of our tech, it's like asking a toaster to perform brain surgery. Enter Zedric Thorne, the ship's engineer, who had the air of someone who'd spent one too many nights solving problems with nothing but duct tape and swearing. He strolled into the command room with the kind of casual arrogance found in cats and tech geniuses. Commander Thorne said, not bothering with formalities, I think I've got a solution to our little missile problem. If it involves sacrificing Kress here, I'm on board, Jax replied. Kress opened his mouth to protest but decided against it. He knew better by now. Nah, Thorne said, waving away the jest. More like a sleight of hand, using those sports feeds they loved so much. Jax arched an eyebrow. You mean the ones that nearly got us turned into space dust? Go on. See, we can use holographic decoys, Thorne explained, his eyes lighting up with the excitement of a mad scientist unveiling his latest contraption. Project them out there, make it look like we've got a whole fleet of exosuited athletes ready to rumble. Jax considered it, tapping his fingers on the armrest. So confuse them with faux warriors. I like it. Kind of like sending a warning shot made of cardboard. It's not perfect, Thorne admitted. But it might just buy us enough time to get our actual defenses online, or at least confuse them long enough to hope they get bored and wander off, Jax remarked. Exactly, Thorne said, and if it doesn't work, well, we'll have a front row seat to our own fireworks show. Optimistic as always, Voss commented. Thorne grinned. I tried, Jax nodded, appreciating the ingenuity even if the odds of success were reminiscent of a snowball in hell. All right, Thorne, get on it. Voss, assist him with whatever you need. Let's make this holographic magic happen. Voss and Thorne set to work, the former diving into her console with a fervor that suggested a caffeine overdose, while the latter pulled up schematics like a magician with a faulty deck of cards. Kress, meanwhile, watched with the kind of awe usually reserved for children watching fireworks. You really think this'll work? Jax shrugged. If it doesn't, at least it'll be spectacular. We can go out with style. The minutes ticked by, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a blunt spoon. Jax paced like a caged lion, which given the situation felt appropriate. Decoys ready to deploy, Thorn announced, breaking the silence. Just say the word, Commander. Jack stopped in his tracks, the weight of the decision settling over him like an old, ill-fitting coat. Do it. With a few swift commands, the Argent Bastion's projectors hummed to life, casting a series of holographic ships bristling with exosuited warriors into the void. They glimmered against the backdrop of space, a digital army poised for battle. Looks like a video game, Cress muttered, half impressed, half terrified. The Surrock's fleet, those feathery overlords with a penchant for overreaction, hesitated on the view screen. Their ships shifted, recalibrating, clearly trying to make sense of the sudden army of not-quite soldiers. They're buying it, Voss said, her voice tinged with disbelief. They're actually buying it, for now, Jack said, ever the realist. Let's not get too comfy. How long before they figure out those soldiers are more hologram than hero? Long enough to fix our defenses, ideally, Thorn replied, already moving to the next task with the efficiency of a man on borrowed time. Assuming nothing else breaks in the meantime, it's us, Jax murmured. Something will break. Inspirational, Commander, Cress said, eyes glued to the screen. Just telling it like it is, Jax replied, watching the Surrock ships hover in uncertainty. But sometimes reality's all we've got. Ires were precious and few, ticking away as Thorn and Voss scrambled to restore some semblance of operational security to the Argent Bastion. The holograms danced in space, a digital army keeping the wolves at bay for now. Defense systems are back online, Voss announced eventually, sounding as triumphant as anyone could in a ship that seemed to hate its own survival. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least we've got a shotgun. Jax nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Good work. Now let's hope those feathered fiends decide they've had enough excitement for one day, or at least enough holographic confusion, Thorn added. The view screen jittered, signaling the imminent return of their favorite avian nemesis. The Surrock's commander appeared, looking as ruffled as a discount feather boa. Humans, the commander squawked, his voice a blend of confusion and frustration. What trickery is this? Nothing personal, Jax replied with a nonchalance he didn't quite feel. Just a little defensive ploy to keep things interesting. Your games will not save you, the Surrock's commander warned, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. We will discover the truth, probably, Jax conceded, but not today. The commander regarded him with the kind of disdain usually reserved for failed art projects. This is not over, human. We will return. Looking forward to it, Jax said, though he meant quite the opposite. The screen went dark once more, leaving the command room in the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Jax exhaled, the tension of the encounter slowly trickling away. That went well, Cress remarked, sounding surprised. Better than expected, Jax agreed, but let's not get too comfortable. We're still one colossal screw-up away from disaster. Voss stretched, the fatigue evident in her movements. I'll take what victories I can get, no matter how temporary. Thorn leaned back, satisfied with his day's work. Well, at least it's never boring around here. Jax chuckled, the sound tinged with the weight of too many close calls. Boring might be nice for a change. The crew settled back into their routines, the ship's hum a constant reminder that life aboard the Argent Bastion was as precarious as it was absurd. Jax took a moment to savor the fragile peace, knowing full well it wouldn't last. Next crisis? Cress asked, trying to inject some levity into the moment. Probably, Jax replied, though he couldn't muster the energy to sound genuinely concerned. Voss and Thorn exchanged a look, the kind that said they were ready for whatever the universe threw at them next, even if they'd rather it threw something soft and non-explosive. Jack settled back into his chair, feeling the familiar rhythm of chaos and calm. Whatever comes next, we'll meet it head-on. Or head-on hologram, as the case may be. The Argent Bastion sailed through the void, a bastion of chaos and resilience in a universe that seemed determined to test both. As long as they were alive, they'd keep fighting, laughing in the face of annihilation, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way to turn impending doom into another day's work. In the end, Jax thought, it was all about survival, one absurd step at a time. And for now, that was enough. The command room of the Argent Bastion was a place where optimism came to die. It was also where Commander Jax Sable was currently trying to cheat death one more time. The holographic decoys had temporarily fooled the Surrocs, but in the universe's grand tradition of screwing with them, the aliens didn't stay duped for long. Commander, the Surrocs are adapting, Voss called out, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her blue hair, a bright defiance against the drabness of the command room, bobbed as she worked. Jax leaned against the console, pretending he had the authority to do so, which technically he did. Adapting, huh? So they're not entirely bird-brained after all. Great, they're recalibrating their targeting systems, Voss explained, tapping furiously at her interface. Looks like they're done playing with our decoys. Guess the cardboard warriors have had their day, Jax muttered. He turned to Lieutenant Cress, who was doing his best impression of a small, terrified animal. Cress, any ideas? Panic and scream. Cress suggested with the enthusiasm of someone about to be thrown out an airlock. Solid plan, Jax deadpanned, but let's keep that as plan B. Zedric Thorne, who probably hadn't met a problem he couldn't duct tape together, strode into the command room. He looked like someone who'd been woken up from a nap he didn't really need. I heard the Surrocs are warming up their fireworks again. What's the plan? We're improvising, Jax replied, which was military speak for winging it and hoping for the best. I was thinking something about orbit and a slingshot. Thorne raised an eyebrow. A slingshot? You mean like the ones kids use or? Think bigger, Jax said, making an expansive gesture with his hands that meant absolutely nothing. We've got that old message beacon, right? What if we use the station's orbit to launch it and get a call for help to the nearest colony? Thorne scratched his chin. Well, it beats waiting around for the Surrocs to turn us into space confetti, but we'll need to tweak the beacon. Of course we will, Jax sighed. Nothing's ever easy. Easy was last week, Voss chimed in, her fingers still dancing over her console. Remember. When the worst thing we worried about was running out of coffee. Good times, Cress said wistfully. All right, let's get to it, Jax ordered, snapping them out of their nostalgia. Thorne, you and Cress handle the beacon modifications. Voss, help me plot the slingshot trajectory. The crew moved with the kind of hurried determination that only came when one's life depended on not screwing up. Thorne and Cress disappeared into the bowels of the ship, where outdated tech lay in wait like a vengeful ghost. Jax and Voss worked through potential trajectories, their eyes glued to the main view screen. The Surroc ships loomed ominously, like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise on their demise. Are we really doing this? Voss asked, a hint of incredulity in her voice. Not like we've got a better option, Jax replied, unless you've managed to build a make everyone go away button while I wasn't looking. If only, Voss said. But knowing our luck, it'd probably just make things worse. True, Jax conceded. All right, let's finalize this trajectory. How close do you think we can get without turning this into a one-way trip? Voss eyed the numbers on her screen with the look of someone trying to solve a complex math problem while being chased by wild animals. Close enough to make it work, I hope. Might singe our paint a little, but nothing we can't handle. Great, Jax muttered. I love a good crispy hull. Meanwhile, Thorne and Cress were neck-deep in wires and blinking lights, modifying the ancient message beacon. Thorne's tools clanged and clattered, an impromptu symphony of organized chaos. So why me? Cress asked, his voice tinged with the kind of curiosity that gets cats killed. Why'd the commander pair me up with you? Thorne smirked. Because you're the only one gullible enough not to run away when ordered. Ah, makes sense, Cress said, nodding. Happy to be the sacrificial lamb. Hey, if it makes you feel any better, Thorne said, pausing to adjust a component with the delicacy of a surgeon. I'd probably bring a lamb if I had one. I hear they make great decoys. Comforting, Cress replied, doing his best not to sound comforted at all. Back in the command room, Jax and Voss had finished their calculations. Jax stood, stretching his arms like he'd just completed a marathon instead of what amounted to guesswork with math. All right, Voss, you got the trajectory locked, he asked. Locked and ready, Voss confirmed, her expression one of grim determination. But there's a chance it could knock us a bit off course, you know. Define a bit, Jax said, already weary of the answer. Let's just say we might end up further from the Surrocs, or a lot closer to the nearest moon, Voss confessed. Jax laughed, the sound dark and humorless. Well, you know what they say, aim for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll die horribly in space, catchy, Voss remarked dryly. Let's do it, Jax commanded, deciding that dying horribly was better than dying predictably. He opened a channel to Thorne and Cress. Status report, Thorne. Beacons as ready as it's gonna be, Thorne replied, his voice crackling over the comms with a cheerfulness that suggested he'd been chewing on electrical wires. We'll need to manually launch it since the automatic systems are as dead as my social life. Sounds about right, Jax said. Get up here and prepare for launch. Thorne and Cress emerged from the depths of the ship, looking like they'd been through a small war, which, in a way, they had. They took their places, eyes on the view screen and the display of blinking lights that governed their fate. Ready when you are, Commander, Thorne said, giving a thumbs up that was almost reassuring. Jax took a deep breath and nodded. Launch the beacon. The ship shuddered as the beacon shot out into space, a tiny piece of hope flung into the void. Jax watched it go, his expression as neutral as he could make it, given that he was internally screaming. Trajectory is holding steady, Voss reported, her voice tinged with something that might have been relief, or possibly the onset of hysteria. The beacon arced gracefully, propelled by the station's orbit, a solitary message ricocheting off the cosmic billiards table in the hope that someone would receive their desperate call for help before they all ended up as space debris. Jax leaned back, trying not to think too hard about how easy it would be for everything to go catastrophically wrong. Now we wait, he said, though the irony was not lost on him that waiting was often the most agonizing part. How long do you think it'll take for someone to pick up the signal? Cress asked, his voice the auditory version of biting his nails. If we're lucky, Thorn said, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. Yours, maybe days, and if we're not, Cress pressed, because some people just love tempting fate. Then I hope you like Surrock's cuisine, Jax replied, his tone as dry as the barren moons they might soon be decorating. Here's hoping they're vegan, Cress muttered. The command room settled into an uneasy calm, the kind that preceded either newfound hope or imminent disaster. Jax knew their respite was temporary, just a pause in the universe's ongoing campaign to make their lives interesting in the worst possible ways. Voss, keep monitoring those frequencies. I want to know the moment someone picks up our SOS, Jax instructed. On it, Voss responded, her fingers flying over the controls like a pianist at a death metal concert. They waited, the moment stretching into eternity. Jax found himself thinking of Earth, or at least the idea of it, since he hadn't set foot there in a long time. The notion that somewhere out there, people were living ordinary lives, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding around one of their distant communication hubs, was as comforting as it was infuriating. Any bets on how long before the Surrocs figure out we're not dead yet? Thorn asked, breaking the silence. Soon, Jax said with a resigned shrug. They've got that whole persistence is key thing going for them. Too bad they use it for trying to murder us. Great, Thorn grinned. Just what we need, a homicidal motivational speaker. As they continued to monitor the view screen, the Surroc ship seemed to be repositioning, possibly attempting to decode what kind of madness the humans were up to now. Voss, any sign they've cottoned on? Jax asked, more out of routine than hope. Not yet, Voss replied, though her expression wasn't exactly brimming with optimism. Time dragged on, the crew of the Argent Bastion operating in a tense, uneasy harmony. It was the kind of cohesion forged by shared circumstances, not camaraderie, but it worked well enough when your survival depended on it. Finally, a blip on Voss's console caught her attention. She leaned forward, peering at the screen as if trying to decipher a particularly stubborn crossword puzzle. Commander, she exclaimed, her voice laced with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. We've got a reply. Someone picked up our signal. The command room erupted into a flurry of movement, consoles lighting up with data streams and incoming communications. Jax felt a surge of relief, tempered with the knowledge that their troubles were far from over. Patch them through, Voss, Jax ordered, the tension in his voice matched only by the anticipation coursing through the crew. On screen now, Voss said, activating the main view screen. The image flickered, then resolved into the bemused face of a human officer on the other end, their surroundings looking blissfully normal compared to the chaos aboard the Argent Bastion. This is Captain Idris of the Valiant Resolve, the officer said, his tone one of cautious inquiry. We received your distress signal. What's the situation? Distress, Jax replied, deadpan. Lots of it. You've got a Surrocs fleet knocking at our door, and they're not here to borrow sugar. Idris nodded, his expression shifting to one of focused urgency. Understood. Hold tight, Commander. We're mobilizing support ships as we speak. Appreciated, Captain, Jax said, trying not to sound too relieved. We'll do our best not to be vaporized before you get here. You've got this far, Idris replied with a reassuring nod. We'll see you soon. The connection cut out, leaving the command room in a silence that felt less oppressive than it had moments before. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that's a start, Voss said, her relief mirrored in the tired smiles of her crewmates. More than a start, Jax corrected, his tone pragmatic. But let's not celebrate until we're out of the frying pan and the fire. Simultaneously, they returned to their stations, a renewed energy coursing through the crew. The path ahead was still fraught with danger, but at least now they weren't facing it alone. Jax allowed himself a moment to savor the small victory, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint smile. It wasn't much, but in the grand scheme of things, it was enough. For now, and in a universe as unpredictable and unforgiving as this one, sometimes just having the chance to fight another day was victory enough. The atmosphere in the command room was akin to that of a funeral, and not the fun kind where someone might jump out of the coffin dressed as a clown. The kind where everyone awkwardly shifts in their seats, hoping the buffet afterward isn't as depressing as the eulogy. Jack stood at the center, the weight of 1,000 disastrous decisions pressing on his shoulders. The Argent Bastion was taking hits like a drunk at a bar brawl, with the Surrocs fleet barely pausing between swings. The command room rattled with every impact, a symphony of creaks and groans that would make anyone consider a career change, perhaps something with less existential dread, like lion taming. Lieutenant Kress was doing his best impression of a cornered animal, wide eyes darting between screens that displayed the grim status of their defenses. Commander, he squeaked, we're running out of tricks. Shields are down to a bare whisper, and I'm pretty sure I just saw a panel pop off like it's trying to abandon ship. Great, Jax replied, deadpan. Let's hope the Surrocs are just as eager to leave. Voss, perpetually unflappable even as the universe crumbled around her, glanced up from her console. Her blue hair was a beacon of calm in the sea of chaos, though even she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. We've still got the Dreamscape interface as a last resort, she suggested, words laced with the kind of hope you sprinkle on a particularly burned piece of toast to make it seem edible. The Dreamscape interface, an untested virtual realm designed for communication with any sentient species, was more theory than practice. It was supposed to connect minds directly, bypassing language barriers. Unfortunately, it also had the slight downside of potentially turning one's brain into cosmic soup if things went south. And by last resort, Cress interjected, you mean only slightly less suicidal than letting the Surrocs use us for target practice, right? Exactly, Voss acknowledged with a nod, as if discussing the weather. But if we can reach the Surrocs leaders, there's a slim chance we can negotiate. Negotiate, Thorne sputtered, voice dripping with skepticism. You mean besides the part where they want to kill us all? Yes, besides that, Voss replied undeterred. Jax groaned inwardly. The universe, with its peculiar brand of irony, had yet again presented him with a choice: risk their minds or definitely lose their lives. It was the kind of decision best made with a stiff drink in hand. Too bad the ship's bar was currently a smoldering wreck. All right, Jax decided, rubbing his temples. We'll try the Dreamscape, but I want our best minds on it, Voss, Thorne, and... Hell, even you, Cress. Wow, Cress deadpanned. What an honor to be included in the We Might Die Horribly Club. Don't mention it, Jax said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. Get it set up. I'll be ready to plug in once you've got it prepped. Let's just try not to fry our synapses before dessert. The crew got to work, pulling up schematics and dusting off the interface unit. It looked like something cobbled together from an abandoned VR arcade, all wires and screens that flickered with intimidating enthusiasm. Jax tried not to imagine the headline: Crew survives Surrocs attack, dies from experimental VR malfunction. As they worked, the ship continued its dance of defiance and destruction. The Surrocs missiles pounded the hull in brutal rhythm, each explosion a reminder of their diminishing options. The Argent Bastion might have been a symbol of human resilience once, but now it was just a floating reminder of how bad things could get before someone hit the reset button. All set, Commander, Voss announced, pushing the blinking headset towards Jax with all the enthusiasm of handing over a ticking time bomb. Jax eyed the contraption, suspicion etched across his features. This thing isn't going to turn my brain into jelly, right? Only if you think too hard, Thorne quipped, offering a lopsided grin. Great. I'll stick to superficial thoughts and the occasional daydream, Jax replied. He took the headset, hesitating just long enough to remind himself that this was, against all logic, the best plan they had. Sliding the headset on, Jax felt a chill run down his spine, not from the cold metal, but from the unsettling thought of letting anyone, especially the Surrocs, rummage through his mind. Initiating connection, Voss said, sounding far too cheerful for the occasion. Brace yourself, Commander. We're diving into the rabbit hole, the world around Jax fragmented, the command room dissolving into a kaleidoscope of color before reforming into something altogether foreign. A virtual landscape unfurled, an abstract approximation of reality as conceived by someone who'd ingested too many hallucinogens. A figure materialized before him, a projection of the Surrocs leader. It was an imposing presence, all angular features and eyes that seemed to pierce through the veneer of the Dreamscape directly into Jax's soul, or maybe that was just the pangs of existential dread talking. Human, the Surrocs leader intoned, voice a low rumble that reverberated through the virtual air. You dare intrude upon my mind. Yeah, well, Jax replied, shrugging with the casual defiance of someone who's got nothing left to lose. You started it. Just thought we'd chat before you blow us to space dust. The Surrocs leader's expression was inscrutable, a lean towards curiosity that Jax hoped meant he wouldn't immediately get kicked out of the virtual realm, or worse. What do you seek? The leader demanded. Not to die horribly, preferably, Jax said, his tone somewhere between sarcasm and sincerity. I'm sure you can appreciate that. The leader's gaze remained unyielding, though there was a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, behind those alien eyes. Your species is resilient, foolishly so. Flattery will get you everywhere, Jax quipped. But how about we cut the foreplay and get to why we're having this interstellar heart-to-heart? Surely there's a reason you haven't just obliterated us yet. The Surrocs leader tilted their head, contemplating the enigma that was human tenacity. We seek to prevent your interference. Your station is a threat to our ambitions. I get it, you're ambitious. Aren't we all? Jax countered. But there's got to be a compromise. We're not exactly keen on the whole end as space dust thing. The silence stretched, the weight of the void pressing down on the Dreamscape. Jax resisted the urge to fill it with more quips. Patience was a virtue, or so he'd been told. Finally, the Surrock's leader spoke again, their tone measured. You propose a ceasefire, only if you promise not to shoot us while we're waving the white flag, Jax replied. We're willing to negotiate, even willing to share resources if it means not getting vaporized. The leader's expression remained unreadable, but there was a shift, an almost imperceptible softening of their demeanor. I will consider your proposition. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Consider quickly, if you don't mind. We're running on fumes out here. We will convene, the Surrock's leader said, the holographic semblance of Jax's mindscape flickering as the connection wavered. Do not test our patience. With that, the dreamscape disintegrated, the alien landscape dissolving like mist before the sun. Jax found himself back in the command room, the familiar sights and sounds of impending doom rushing back to greet him. Well, Voss asked, anticipation etched across her features. We're not dead yet, Jax said, pulling the headset off and tossing it aside. They're considering a ceasefire. Considering? Thorne echoed, a mix of disbelief and hope coloring his voice. Hey, it's more than we had 5 minutes ago, Jax pointed out. Let's not look a gift truce in the mouth. The crew exchanged glances, the kind of look that acknowledged things were still dire but maybe, just maybe, a little less so. Keep monitoring all channels, Jax ordered, trying to instill a sense of purpose over the chaos. We'll have to be ready in case they change their minds. The crew nodded, returning to their stations with a renewed vigor, though the grim reality of their precarious situation remained ever-present. The Surrock's fleet still loomed, a constant reminder that their survival was hanging by the thinnest of threads. Jax leaned back in his chair, staring at the screens that depicted their battered ship, feeling the weight of responsibility settling in once more. But for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope amidst the overwhelming darkness. It wasn't much, but for now it was enough to keep them going, and in the unforgiving expanse of space, sometimes that was the best you could hope for. Jax blinked, the fluorescent hue of the command room morphing into a bizarre virtual battlefield as the dreamscape reasserted itself around him. He felt the familiar cloak of bewilderment settle over his shoulders like an old, unwelcome friend. Apparently, the Surrocks had a flair for the dramatic. The landscape was a chaotic swirl of color and form, a battlefield that looked like it was designed by a committee of war poets and abstract artists. Beside him, Kira Voss materialized, her blue hair standing out like a defiant banner in the dreamscape's shifting madness. Well, isn't this something, she said, surveying the scene with an expression that could have been mistaken for admiration if she wasn't so damn sarcastic. Yeah, Jax agreed. Looks like the inside of a blender during an existential crisis. They moved cautiously across the surreal terrain, navigating landscapes that shifted from verdant fields to barren wastelands in the blink of an eye. So this is how the Surrocks visualize war, Voss mused. It's like they're trying to one-up Salvador Dali, or maybe they just got tired of blowing up planets and decided to give abstract art a shot, Jax replied. He gestured to an army of humanoid figures clashing in the distance, their movements oddly reminiscent of a choreographed dance. Think those are supposed to be us? Voss squinted at the figures, her skepticism palpable even through the dreamscape's distortion. Maybe or maybe they're just having a weird football match. Jax chuckled, though it was devoid of any real humor. Wouldn't surprise me. The Surrocks probably think our sports are some kind of war games. They continued forward, passing through the visual cacophony of Surrock's conceptual artistry, deciphering slivers of meaning from the madness. It was like trying to interpret a toddler's drawing during an alien invasion. Somewhere in the chaos, truth lay hidden. You know, Voss remarked, if we survive this, I'm going to demand a raise. And a therapist. A really good one, yeah, well, maybe we can use the Surrock's art budget for that, Jax suggested. Amidst the vibrant chaos, fragments of broadcasts flickered, embedded in the dreamscape like errant memories. Jax and Voss focused on a nearby projection, a distorted replay of a human exosuit match. The Surrock's warriors observed with analytical precision, seemingly engaged in a form of cerebral strategizing. Look at them, Jax said, gesturing at the Surrock's. They're studying our games like it's military intel, Voss nodded. To them, it must seem like we're conducting massive training exercises. No wonder they're jumpy. Jax watched the replay unfold, the exosuited figures colliding in a mock battle that the Surrocks apparently interpreted as some grand strategy. If only they knew it's just a bunch of people in ridiculous suits trying not to break their necks. I doubt they'd see the humor in it, Voss replied dryly. Aliens with no sense of humor. What a shocker, Jax glanced at her, appreciating the steady presence she provided amidst the absurdity. Think we can use this to our advantage? He asked. Depends, Voss answered. Do you fancy giving a crash course on human sportsmanship to a fleet of alien warships? Not unless we can play from a safe distance, Jax replied. Preferably with a referee. They moved on, leaving the projection behind and pressing deeper into the dreamscape. The surreal battlefield continued to twist and reconfigure, presenting new challenges at every turn. It was as if the Surrox's dreamscape had taken personal offense to their presence and was determined to make them work for every inch. As they waded through the strange terrain, a new scene unfolded. A Surrox war council, their leaders huddled together, communicating in a series of complex gestures. Jax watched, trying to make sense of their alien logic. It was like watching a group of squids trying to play charades. Think they're plotting our demise or picking lunch? Voss asked, her voice tinged with mock seriousness. Hopefully the latter, Jax replied. I really don't want to end up as the main course. They observed the council, the Surrox gestures slowly beginning to make a twisted sort of sense. It was clear they were strategizing, evaluating human broadcasts as potential threats. Okay, Jack said, rubbing his temples. So how do we convince them that our games aren't a declaration of war? Maybe we can challenge them to a match, Voss suggested, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Winner gets to keep their planet. High stakes, Jax chuckled. But somehow I doubt the Surrox would appreciate the irony, Voss shrugged. Worth a shot. If nothing else, it might buy us some time. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden shift in the dreamscape, a swirling vortex of light opening before them, pulling at the fabric of their virtual world. Jax and Voss exchanged wary glances. Guess we're about to find out what's behind door number 2, Jax muttered. The vortex deposited them before the Surrox leader, whose presence was as imposing in the dreamscape as it had been in reality. The leader regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and caution, like a scientist examining a particularly perplexing specimen. Humans, the Surrox leader intoned, voice echoing across the dreamscape. You return to our mental domain. Yeah, Jax replied, crossing his arms. We thought we'd drop by, see how the neighbors are doing. The Surrox leader's features remained inscrutable, but Jax detected a glimmer of interest in their expression. Your race is persistent, stubborn's more like it, Voss interjected. We figured we might as well talk, considering you're planning to blow us to bits. The leader's gaze shifted to the exosuit projections, now replaying for their benefit. These exercises. You perform them for amusement, pretty much, Jax confirmed. Think of it as training without the whole life or death aspect. The leader tilted their head, the alien equivalent of a raised eyebrow. And yet you risk much in these displays. You've obviously never seen humans on a Saturday night, Voss quipped. We've got a knack for reckless fun. The leader considered this, the dreamscape shivering with their contemplation. Your broadcasts are not threats then, only to good taste, Jax replied. But no, they're not threats. We just like to play pretend. The leader's expression shifted, their posture relaxing. Perhaps we have misunderstood. Never would have guessed, Jax said dryly. The leader ignored the jibe, instead gesturing to the dreamscape around them. This realm is a reflection of our thoughts, our fears. We believed your broadcasts to be acts of aggression. Well, let's set the record straight, Voss suggested. We're not interested in interstellar invasions. We've got enough problems on our own turf. The leader's gaze softened, their demeanor shifting from adversarial to contemplative. Then perhaps we can find common ground. Jax exchanged a glance with Voss, a flicker of hope threading through the tension. Common ground sounds good. Beats mutual destruction any day. The leader nodded, a gesture of agreement that seemed to ripple through the dreamscape, calming its chaotic nature. We will consider this. Truce, consider quickly, Jax urged, the urgency in his voice cutting through the dreamscape's haze. We're running on borrowed time. Understood, the leader replied. We will confer amongst ourselves. In the meantime, you return to your realm. Before Jax or Voss could respond, the dreamscape began to dissolve, the vibrant colors and shifting forms melting away like mist in the morning sun. The command room reasserted itself, the familiar hum of the ship's systems a comforting balm against the strangeness of the virtual realm. Well, Voss said, pulling her headset off with a sigh, that was. Enlightening, Jax echoed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Yeah, let's go with that. Cress looked up from his station, a mixture of curiosity and concern etched across his face. Did you make contact? Yes, Jax replied. Understanding, maybe. They're considering not blowing us up. Considering, Cress repeated the word heavy with skepticism. That's reassuring. Hey, it's progress, Jax insisted. And right now, I'll take what I can get, Voss leaned back, stretching the tension from her shoulders. Let's hope they don't change their minds before breakfast. The crew resumed their work, the command room settling into a tense but hopeful rhythm. The Surrox fleet remained a looming threat, but the promise of potential peace hung in the air like a fragile truce. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Jax watched the monitors, the displays showing the Surrox ship still poised in attack formation. It felt like waiting for a storm to pass. Only this storm had an armada and a grudge. But amidst the anxiety, there was a glimmer of something akin to hope. Maybe it was the dreamscape's lingering effects, or maybe it was just the realization that, for the moment, they had a fighting chance. And in the unforgiving void of space, sometimes a fighting chance was all you needed. Jax rubbed his temples, the lingering effects of the dreamscape still swirling in his head like an unfortunate cocktail of confusion and caffeine. Next time someone suggests diving into an alien's mental playground, remind me to say no. Lieutenant Kira Voss was already back in the command room, her blue hair catching the dim light. She looked as unfazed as ever, which was either comforting or deeply unsettling. Noted, she replied dryly, fiddling with the communication console. So, any chance we just made friends with the Tentacle Brigade? Jax sighed, watching the command room reassemble itself around them like a jigsaw puzzle. I wouldn't say friends, more like frenemies who might not shoot us today. Cress, glued to the defense monitors, frowned. I'd settle for them just not shooting us until after lunch. Optimistic as usual, Jax quipped, leaning over his shoulder. The Surrox ships were still out there, an ominous parade of destruction in neat formation, just waiting for a reason to open up on them. It was like having a loaded gun pointed at your head, except the gun was an entire fleet, and the head was everyone aboard the Argent Bastion. Any change? Not unless you count my blood pressure, Cress muttered, adjusting his collar. Always the warrior, Voss chimed in, swiveling her chair. Why don't you take up knitting? Great stress relief. Only if I can knit a noose, Cress shot back. Before Jax could add his own commentary to the morbid humor, the ship's intercom crackled to life, spilling static into their tense silence. It was Zedric Thorne, the problem solver with the annoying habit of sounding like a man who didn't have a fleet of homicidal aliens to contend with. Commander Sable, you still alive, for now, Jax replied, tapping the console with a finger. What's your status doing laps around the bridge? Thought I'd work on my cardio while we're negotiating our continued existence. Good to know you're taking this seriously, Jax said, his tone as dry as a desert. You pick up anything useful? Former interns, a Surrox sympathizer, but other than that, pretty quiet, Thorne replied. They're definitely keeping an eye on us, then they'll love the show we're about to put on, Voss said, spinning back to her console with a flourish. Ready to give them a little piece of human culture? Is this where we break out the interpretive dance? Jax asked, half seriously. More like interpretive deception, Voss corrected, bringing up a display of human broadcasts. We need to make it crystal clear to our squid-loving friends that our games are just that, games. Jax watched as clips of various sports matches played out on the view screen, from exosuited athletes leaping around like lunatics, to more traditional games that looked less like warfare and more like coordinated chaos. Think they'll get it? No clue, Voss admitted, but it's either this or we all get very familiar with the concept of a vacuum. Jax ran a hand through his hair, the telltale sign of a man grasping at straws in sanity. All right. Let's show them what we're made of. The command room settled into a focused quiet as the crew prepared their broadcast. It was a simple plan, really. Use the same dreamscape to send their message, explaining that humanity's broadcasts weren't a prelude to war, but rather a testament to their love of competition, however bizarrely expressed. Voss, you're up, Jax said, nodding for her to initiate the dreamscape interface. It was like volunteering to jump into a pool without knowing if it had any water. But then again, that's what heroes, or idiots, were made of. Voss activated the system, her fingers a blur over the controls. The room dissolved once more, the transition smoother this time as if the dreamscape was getting used to their intrusions. The familiar surreal landscape reformed, albeit with fewer deathly overtones and more fields of vivid color. It was as if the Surrox had decided to dial down the apocalypse in favor of abstract modern art. Welcome back, intoned the Surrox leader, materializing before them, looking as inscrutable as a poker player with a royal flush. Your presence here is unexpected. Jax took a step forward, adopting what he hoped was an authoritative stance. In reality, it probably looked more like a man trying not to fall over in zero gravity. We're here to clarify a few things. Our broadcasts aren't aggressive. They're entertainment. Entertainment, repeated the Surrox leader, the concept clearly foreign. Explain, gladly, Voss interjected, gesturing toward the virtual field that now displayed a series of games. It's called sport. Humans train, compete, and sometimes, rarely, get along without trying to kill each other. The Surrox leader tilted their head, watching the players dart around the field in their cumbersome exosuits. Your species finds this amusing. To us, this is peak entertainment, Jax said with a shrug, his voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that could have cut glass. Think of it as practice for survival, minus the whole blood and destruction thing. The leader seemed to consider this, the dreamscape beginning to mirror the calm of their deliberation. Your broadcasts are not declarations of war. This is what you claim. Precisely, Voss confirmed. Our games don't carry any strategic threat to you. We're just competitive idiots who sometimes wear costumes, Jax added, with a grin that was more gallows than gala. The leader's gaze shifted, not to their fleet this time, but to their council that stood behind them. The squids in suits were mimicking the clip of a football game, albeit with less finesse and more flailing. It was like watching a group of babies learn to walk, endearing if not entirely confidence-inspiring. We see now, the Surrock's leader said, a hint of understanding seeping into their voice. Your species' actions are not hostile. Merely, peculiar. You've got that right, Voss muttered under her breath. Jax felt a surge of relief, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. This could work. So how about we call this whole thing off? You keep your missiles, we keep our games, and everyone goes home happy. The leader paused, their tentacled brow furrowing as they conferred with their council. It wasn't a unanimous decision, given the various gesticulations of protest among the group, but slowly the tide seemed to shift toward understanding, or at least tolerance. Very well, the leader announced, their voice a sonorous decree. We will not attack. For now, this misunderstanding is resolved. Great, Jack said, managing a smile that felt more like a wince. We appreciate the gesture. The dreamscape began to deteriorate once more, the vibrant colors draining away to reveal the cold steel of the command room. Jax blinked, trying to reorient himself as the familiar hum of the ship returned. It was like waking from a particularly vivid dream, where the lines between reality and imagination blurred together in a way that made you question your sanity. Well, that was easier than expected, Cress remarked, still glued to his station. Jax shot him a look. Speak for yourself. I'm just glad we didn't get thrown out on our collective asses. Voss leaned back, her chair creaking in protest. Let's hope they don't change their minds before we're out of firing range, or before Happy Ior, Jax added, rubbing the back of his neck. I've got a date with a bottle and a headache the size of a small moon. The crew worked in tense, hopeful harmony, fingers dancing over controls, eyes glued to screens. The Surrock's fleet, once poised for destruction, now slowly retreated, the ships peeling off like a flock of birds changing direction, or maybe just realizing they'd crashed the wrong party. Looks like they're leaving, Thorne reported, amusement coloring his tone. Guess they decided not to stick around for the encore. Smart choice, Voss said, glancing at Jax. I've seen our encore. Spoiler alert, it's disappointing. Jax chuckled, despite everything. Well, at least we didn't die today. I'll call that a win. As the last of the Surrock's fleet vanished into the void, the atmosphere in the command room shifted from a tense waiting game to something resembling relief. It was over for now, a temporary reprieve, like a ceasefire in a war that had been more about misunderstanding than munitions. Cress sighed, releasing a breath he'd been holding for far too long. So what now, Jax said, straightening up with the air of a man who'd finally remembered how to breathe. We fix whatever's broken, patch whatever's leaking, and maybe, just maybe, get some sleep. Sleep, Voss echoed, with a wistful smile. Sounds like a dream, yeah, well, let's hope it's a good one this time, Jax replied, clapping a hand on her shoulder as they headed out of the command room. The Argent Bastion was still scarred, still battered, but it was alive. And in the unforgiving expanse of space, that was more than a victory. It was a testament to the resilience and absurdity of human nature. As the ship sailed on into the star-speckled abyss, Jax couldn't help but marvel at how, against all odds, they were still here, still fighting, still laughing in the face of disaster. Because in the end, that's what humans did best. Turn chaos into comedy, disaster into a daring escape, and the universe into one hell of a cosmic joke. Commander Jax Sable stood in the command room of the Argent Bastion, a monument to mankind's stubborn refusal to die quietly. The place looked like it had been through a blender on obliterate, but it was still standing. Much like Jax, who was currently wondering if his spleen was entirely where it was supposed to be after their Dreamscape diplomacy session. Fixing the tower, Jax mused aloud, as if just saying it made the prospect more likely. I guess that means more duct tape and prayer. Lieutenant Kira Voss, ever the irreverent pragmatist, leaned back in her chair, blue hair glinting under the harsh lights. Duct tape, hope, and a healthy dose of please don't explode, she corrected, fingers dancing over the communication console. The room still buzzed with the aftereffects of their recent chat with the Surrock's, a complete misunderstanding resolved over a game of space charades. Who'd have thought? I'll take that over actual gunfire any day, Jax replied, running a hand through his hair. He was thankful for small victories, even if they came wrapped in intergalactic misunderstandings. Still, can't help but feel like we've dodged a bullet. Or a very large missile. Zedric Thorne, their resident problem solver and part-time cardio enthusiast, appeared on a nearby screen, sipping something that was probably more caffeine than coffee. Good job not dying, Commander. It's a good look on you, yeah. Well, I aim to please, Jax quipped, though his smile was more of a grimace. What's the status on the repairs? We've got teams working round the clock, Thorne said, with the kind of cheer that suggested he might just be a little too rested for someone in his position. Should be back to full operation in a couple of days. Voss interjected, her tone dry as a Martian desert. What do you plan to do with all that time, Jax? Crochet a new set of drapes for the command room. Tempting, Jack said, tapping his chin thoughtfully. But I think I'll stick with the tried and true method of brooding and self-reflection. Watch out, Universe, Voss said, smirking. Commander Jack Sable is on a path of self-discovery. Next thing you know, he'll be penning poetry about the meaning of life and interspecies cooperation. Jack snorted, shaking his head. More like the meaning of why every alien species we meet has a tendency to want us dead. Because we're just that charming, Voss replied, her sarcasm bordering on affectionate. The crew of the Argent Bastion moved with the kind of practice chaos that came from surviving one too many near-death experiences. Jax watched them, a mix of pride and the usual existential dread that came with command. They'd all be fine eventually, assuming they didn't get themselves blown up in the process. Let's focus on getting everything back online, Jax said, rolling his shoulders. I'd like to send a message to the rest of the fleet to let them know we're not space junk yet. On it, Crest chimed in from his station, still slightly twitchy from the whole ordeal but game as ever. Beacons operational. Should I add wish you were here? Sure, Jax said, and maybe throw in a we survived the squid apocalypse while you're at it. With the beacon set to broadcast their survival, Jax took a moment to consider the events leading up to this point. The Surrocs had been about 2 seconds from turning them into interstellar debris, and yet here they were, alive and marginally less threatened. A win in anyone's book. Voss swiveled in her chair, surveying the bustling command room with a critical eye. Think the Surrocs are really on board with this peace thing? Who knows? Jack shrugged. But we've got an opening. Maybe it's time we start thinking about alliances instead of annihilation. And here I thought you liked living on the edge, Voss said, her tone teasing. Jax chuckled, feeling the kind of relief that came from knowing your imminent demise had been postponed. I do, but even thrill-seekers need a breather. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the hum of machinery and the occasional muttered curse from a crew member encountering a particularly stubborn piece of tech. It was the kind of peace Jax hadn't realized he'd been craving until now. You ever think about what it means? Voss asked suddenly, her voice quieter, contemplative. All this space, all these stars, and us here trying not to get squashed like bugs. Jax spared a glance out the view screen where the vast emptiness stretched out like a black sea dotted with distant points of light. Sometimes, he admitted, makes you wonder why we even bother, because we're human, Voss replied simply. And we're too stupid to know when to quit, Jax laughed, a genuine sound that felt surprisingly good. Yeah, too stubborn to die, too clever for our own good. That's us. They shared a moment of understanding, a camaraderie forged in the fires of shared experiences and mutual survival. It was more than enough. All right, enough of that sentimental crap, Jax said, brushing off the moment with a grin. Let's get back to work before the Surrocs change their minds and decide they don't like us after all. Voss rolled her eyes, but there was a smirk on her lips. Aye, Captain. Let's keep this rust bucket floating. The crew moved with renewed purpose, spurred on by the sense that, for once, the universe had decided to give them a break. Jax watched them, feeling something akin to gratitude, though he wasn't quite ready to admit it out loud. Not yet, anyway. As the hours ticked by, the Argent Bastion slowly regained its footing, systems flickering back to life under the careful ministrations of its crew. Jax found himself in the command room, staring out at the stars, the weight of the universe feeling just a little bit lighter on his shoulders. Hey Jax, Crest called, breaking the silence. Got a message from the Surrocs. They want to know if we're up for a rematch sometime. Jax turned, a slow smile spreading across his face. Tell them we're game, but they'll have to bring their A-game if they want to keep up. Crest nodded, amusement dancing in his eyes as he relayed the message. Jax returned his gaze to the stars, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction settle over him. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was a start. Think we can trust them? Voss asked, her voice low, cautious. Maybe, Jax replied, or maybe we just trust that they are as confused and curious about us as we are about them. Voss considered this, nodding slowly. Guess that's a start, more of a start than we've had with anyone else, Jax said, crossing his arms. And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning. The Argent Bastion sailed on, cutting through the endless night, a testament to humanity's grit and determination. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even close, but it was theirs. And for Jax Sable, that was more than enough. As they drifted into the unknown, Jax couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found a way forward. A path through the chaos and confusion where understanding was possible and cooperation wasn't just a pipe dream. Because in the end, when all was said and done, that was what humanity did best. Find a way to survive, to thrive, and to laugh in the face of the universe's darkest moments. And as the stars stretched out before them, Jax knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together, with humor, hope, and just the right amount of stubbornness.